We are back this weekend. It's UFC Vegas 55 betting and DraftKings show. I'm Jon Kelly. Let's hear the picks. In our first fight of the night, we have Elise Reed coming in as a minus 165 favorite. The comeback on Sam Page Hughes is plus 145. And this one is a funny matchup because it's kind of like that Spider-Man meme where they're both Spider-Man pointing at each other, because these two fighters do exactly the same things. They're very similar fighting styles. Both of them have similar weaknesses. Neither of them really have much strengths. So I think this is going to be a pretty competitive matchup. I don't hate anybody for just blind betting who's ever priced as the underdog in this spot. I'm just going to hit a pass altogether. I do think Elise Reed probably edges this one out just because I think she is the cleaner striker on the feet. She's a better kickboxer. Both of them struggle to defend takedowns. So yes, that could be a potential path if Hughes comes out aggressively looking to land takedowns here. But I'm not sure she can control Elise Reed on the mat. Elise Reed, while she does give up the takedowns, she's usually good at working back to her feet. Pretty difficult to control, especially from somebody that's not like a super good grappler in Sam Hughes. So this one where I think it's going to be close. I think the margins are thin on both sides, but I'm going to lean with the favorite in Elise Reed. Elise Reed by decision, but in terms of DraftKings, I just think there's much better fights to target. I know it's a short slate with only 11 fights total, but this is probably like the 11th best fight to target on DraftKings this week. Felipe Kolaris comes in as a minus 170 favorite. The comeback on Chase Hooper is plus 150. And this is just a funny matchup to me because both guys are historically pretty untrustworthy. You know, Chase Hooper was built up as this big hyped prospect, wizard grappler, and then it turns out he just has absolutely no sense of striking, defense, or really offense, and basically not really anything outside of his pure jiu-jitsu, which is good. And I think what's working for him in this matchup is Felipe Kolaris does not have a smart fight IQ, and I think he's actually going to give Chase Hooper the grappling match that he wants. And I think that could be a problem for him here because Kolaris, while he is a black belt, he's not really that good of a grappler. He defends takedowns at just 43%, and he usually is the one trying to initiate the grappling. So I expect him to move forward. He's another guy that doesn't have much striking defense, but he is super durable, just like Chase Hooper. So this just has kind of a meme fight written all over it. I expect Kolaris to be a little bit more aggressive on the feet, but he's not really a power puncher. So while I expect Kolaris to be winning the striking exchanges, I really don't think it's going to be that far off one way or the other, as bad as Chase Hooper is on the feet. I think it's going to be pretty even. And then in terms of the grappling, I think Chase Hooper is actually more dangerous here. So this is a decent buy low spot on Chase Hooper because most people write him off. They think he's a busted prospect. And yes, he's not fun to bet on. It's tough to watch at times, but this is actually a pretty favorable matchup for him against somebody that I don't rate super highly either. And yes, I did bet him against Chris Gutierrez, but that was a completely different stylistic matchup for him. And this is one that I think favors Chase Hooper. Plus 150 underdog. I don't hate that. I didn't bet him myself, but I am going to be taking a pretty overweight stance on DraftKings just because in a victory, I think it probably comes by a finish, and it comes with multiple grappling exchanges as well. So I think Chase Hooper is probably one of my favorite underdogs this week, which is scary to say because you're betting on Chase Hooper, but I don't know. It's a short slate. We got to get a little different somewhere. I like Chase Hooper to get it done this week. Next up in the bantamweight division, we have Jonathan Martinez comes in as a minus 220 favorite. The comeback on Vince Morales is plus 180. And this is a matchup where I think it's really going to come down to who can dictate the striking range, and I favor Martinez just ever so slightly to do that, just because he has a kick-heavy approach. He's very powerful with his leg kicks. He's going to throw a lot of volume out there with his leg kicks, and Vince Morales is basically just a one-dimensional boxer. He is a good boxer, does have a wrestling background, but never tends to use it, and he's very susceptible to leg kicks, which, again, Martinez is going to throw a ton of those. So I could see this one being Martinez just having a lot more success maintaining distance, landing those leg kicks, and doing more, whereas Morales is going to need to be able to get inside and counter him effectively. And outside of those big moments, or potentially a knockdown or a knockout, I think Martinez probably just edges it here. So in terms of DraftKings, I do think Martinez probably doesn't have as much upside as the other people in his price range. So I actually think I lean towards the dog in terms of DraftKings, even though I think Vince Morales loses this fight. I think he does have upside in a victory because at his price, he really doesn't need to crush on this small slate. He just needs to win. And he potentially has knockdown or knockout upside. Jonathan Martinez has been dropped 4 times in the UFC and twice in his last 3 fights. So I do think there's upside in the underdog. I think Martinez probably gets his hand raised, but I'm going to have more Morales on DraftKings this week. And here's really where the card starts to get a little bit fun. We have Omar Morales going up against Uros Medic in what should be a firefight for as long as it lasts. And this is actually my first bet of the night. I bet Omar Morales at -154. I have a sneaky suspicion that Uros Medic is almost a complete fraud. And that doesn't mean he can't win here, because the way he wins most of his fights is by early knockout. He comes out hot. He comes out heavy. He's super unpredictable, darting in and out of range. He comes from unconventional angles. He comes from the Alaskan regional scene, which, as you may know, is definitely not the hub of superstar prospects in terms of MMA regional scenes. Dusted a bunch of bums basically in the first round on the regional scene, comes over to Contenders, gets a first round finish over Elon Cruz. Elon Cruz, who went 0-2 in the UFC and got cut both times by knockout. He ended up knocking him out. So yes, it was impressive, but Elon Cruz didn't land a single strike in that fight. Medic clipped him early, and Mark Smith just let him completely brutalize Elon Cruz for basically the entire round for whatever reason, until he finally had the brains to stop that fight. It was an absolute beating. I do not suggest going back to watching it. And so now I just think Medic is being extra hyped into this superstar finisher. And yes, he lost against Jalen Turner, significantly out-grappled in that fight, but people are giving him a pass because it's Jalen Turner, and I get that. I like Jalen Turner myself, but let's not forget that Jalen Turner was clipping him on the feet as well. He had him rocked multiple times in between those grappling exchanges, and then in terms of the grappling, the dude just does not have much in terms of defensive grappling, and now he's going up against a guy, Omar Morales, who is a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, doesn't really use his grappling at the UFC level, so that's not why I bet him. I'm not expecting him to take the path of least resistance, which involves takedowns and grappling, but I just think he's a better striker, and certainly a better striker over 15 minutes. I think Medic has a short window early to hurt Morales and get him out of there. Outside of that, I think Morales styles on him. Morales is more of a counter striker, which I think he's going to have a lot of success doing against somebody that's defensively lazy in Uros Medic, especially as he starts to get tired. And listen, this guy's cardio is completely unproven over 15 minutes. Outside of the round 1 finishes, like anytime he's been pushed even later in the first rounds, he's huffing and puffing a little bit. Omar Morales, we've seen go a hard 15 minutes. This is the same dude that outstruck Mowgli Benitez. This is the same dude that outstruck Shane Young. And yes, he lost against Giga Chikadze, one of the better strikers in the division, and Jonathan Pierce, who pushed an absolute crazy pace on him and grappled him. That's not what Uros Medic is going to do. So I just think over 15 minutes, Morales is going to pick his spots. He's going to make those counter shots work. And I think he gets his hand raised. I actually think he finishes Medic probably in the second or third round, but I feel pretty confident on Omar Morales this week. I backed him at -154, and I think he's one of the better plays on DraftKings in that upper mid tier. And overall, this fight is probably one of the best ones to target on DraftKings, because a lot of fights up and down the card, we're expecting decisions, low scoring. This isn't one of them. Medic in a win, first round knockout. Morales in a win, could be a knockout in any round. If he fights smart, could be a submission in any round. I'm expecting a later knockout, second or third, but I do like Morales to get his hand raised here. And next up, we got the big boys. Jailton Almeida comes in as a -575 favorite. The comeback on Parker Porter is +410. Parker Porter coming in on a 3-fight win streak here. A lot of people think this line could be wide. I get the argument, but on the flip side, I don't really have any interest in backing Parker Porter, just because I think the grappling edge is so clear for Jailton Almeida here, and he's super athletic, physically strong. I think he's going to grind Porter against the fence, take him down, probably find a sub. And you see Almeida's inside distance line is -200. That's the best on the entire slate. So he's obviously going to be one of the most popular plays on DraftKings, but for good reason. I will have some shares of Porter, but I'm a guy that plays multiple lineups. So that's really why, is just simply for the leverage, because maybe you think Porter could outlast Almeida over 15 minutes. He is a high volume striker, maybe mix in takedowns of his own. I personally don't really see it. So I'm going to go with Jailton Almeida. I think he gets his hand raised here. I think he finds a finish on the mat. And I think he keeps the hype building as an exciting prospect in this division. So Almeida by submission is the official pick, and he's obviously going to be one of the better plays on DraftKings, but he's going to come with a hefty ownership along with that as well. Next up, we have Joseph Holmes, comes in as a minus 200 favorite. The comeback on Alan Amidovsky is plus 160. And this is one where I just basically am never going to back Joseph Holmes at a big favorite price tag in the UFC. I bet Jamie Pickett against Joseph Holmes in his last fight. That was one of my bigger underdog bets of the entire year in his last fight. And a lot of that is because Joseph Holmes, I just simply don't trust anything about his game. He's very long and rangy. He's going to have a 6-inch reach advantage in this fight, but the guy just doesn't really know how to use his length. He's very athletic, former football player, but that's about where it starts and ends in terms of his athleticism and his striking, the way that he fights. He's typically more of a grappler, but his wrestling's not that good, so there's really no guarantee he can get the fight to the mat. And where I say he's more of a grappler, it's because he does have finishes, but it's again super low level, and honestly his grappling is not very good. I still think it's probably better than Amidovsky here, who's a one-dimensional power puncher for the most part, but I really don't think you can rate this guy well against basically any competent UFC level competition here. So seeing him as a minus 200 favorite, I'm almost immediately going to have interest in the underdog regardless of who it is. And yes, there's concerns on the Amidovsky side. He was 8-0 as a prospect. All 8 wins come by knockout. 6 of those 8 came inside the first round, I believe. So cardio unproven for him. Basically a front-running power puncher guy, comes in the UFC, loses a decision to Jocko where he does absolutely nothing, gets out grappled, and then gets knocked out by John Phillips. Now we haven't seen him for almost 3 years. He took a 6-month USADA suspension for smoking a little doobie, and then he also was held out basically another 2 years after that for whatever reason. So now we haven't seen him in about 3 years. I'm willing to embrace the unknown variance in that A, maybe Amidovsky improves some of the leaks in his game, but also B, it's like even if he hasn't and it's the same version of Amidovsky that we've seen before, he still has upside to knock out Joseph Holmes. Joseph Holmes does not have good striking defense. I mentioned he's going to be the bigger, longer fighter in there, but he gets hit a lot, and his cardio failed him in that Pickett fight. That's not the first time it's failed him. This guy historically does not have good cardio. So there's tons of unknowns on both sides, a lot of concerns. I'm expecting it to be sloppy, which is great for DraftKings because we know sloppy fights tend to score very well. So I will have exposure to the home side as well, just across 20 or so lineups. But I'm definitely leaning towards the underdog in Amidovsky. I think he has first-round knockout upside. I think he has win upside. And I'm going to go with the guy who basically, I don't trust either of them, but I'm going to go with the guy who I'm getting a better price tag on against a guy who I think people are probably just going to play on the sense that he's a favorite and we haven't seen Amidovsky in a couple years. So give me the underdog in this one. Next fight up in the middleweight division, we have Jun Young Park, comes in as a minus 205 favorite. Eric Anders on the comeback at plus 160. And this is one where I honestly think it's going to be a pretty competitive decision regardless of who wins. Jun Young Park is one of those fighters who's pretty decent or at least above average in most areas in terms of fighting. But Eric Anders is kind of the same thing, and he's so hot and cold. Like one time out, he looks like a stud. Next time out, he doesn't really do much. Poor fight IQ as well. So I just really don't want to trust either of these guys because I think Park definitely fights smarter, but I also think he's going to be at a power disadvantage here and just a pure athleticism disadvantage against Eric Anders. I think Anders could potentially land takedowns here and control Park on the mat. I just don't trust him to do that whatsoever or fight the smart game plan. So it's going to be a close fight. I'm expecting it to go to decision. You see the over 2.5 is minus 200. So the odds tell us that as well. I guess we'll go with Anders just because I think he has more upside in a victory, but I think it's going to be close either way. Anders by decision is the official pick. I don't have a ton of interest on DraftKings regardless. And next up in the women's strawweight division, we have a fight that I think a lot of people are pretty split on. It seems to be like the Twitter fight of the week where both people are going back and forth, at least in my circles. But we got Tabitha Baby Shark Richie coming in as a small favorite, minus 125. Polyana Viana on the comeback at plus 105. And this is a matchup where I have a big bet on Tabitha Richie here. It's Baby Shark season. I'm excited because I think Tabitha Richie is going to land takedowns here. I think she's going to bank some control time. Basically, looking at the Viana side, I just don't really see a path to victory for her here outside of like a submission from guard, which I would be surprised considering Richie is a highly credentialed black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But also, I just don't really trust Viana whatsoever. She's never won a decision in her entire career. She actually only has one victory outside of the first round, and it was a second round finish. Anytime she's been pushed outside of the first round, she doesn't look good. I think Richie's the better wrestler here, and yes, you'll hear people complain about her takedowns. I don't think her takedowns, I don't really care. I know she's gonna be aggressive. I know she's gonna move forward, and against a fighter who's gonna be willing to flop to her back and play guard for extended periods. We just saw this stylistic fight play out with Tracy Cortez and Melissa Gatto. I want the person who's going to be on top banking control time. And I know Polyana Viana is going to do that because she does it in all of her fights. And yes, she is tricky. She's coming off back-to-back first-round armbar finishes. But I just think that that's the reason why this line is where it is. Yes, the size is a concern. Reach is going to be a lot smaller. Polyana Viana is going to have a 6-inch reach advantage. And I do think Viana is probably a little bit cleaner in terms of the striking. Richie is kind of sloppy, moves forward, eats a lot of shots. But I think her aggressiveness and her ability to mix in those takedowns is basically going to take away any sort of striking advantage that Viana has, especially since I don't expect Viana to even keep it on the feet. So I'm just backing Tabitha Ricci here because I think she's the better wrestler. I expect her to spend a lot of time in top position. I think she could stay safe because she's a highly credentialed grappler. And I just really think Polyana Viana's only path here is to either keep the fight standing and outstrike her, which again, don't think she can do that. Defense takedowns at like 40% in the UFC. I don't think she's going to keep the fight standing, or another armbar here, which women's MMA, could it happen? Absolutely. I just don't think it happens against Tabitha Ricci. So this is actually my biggest bet of 2022. It's Baby Shark season. Tabitha Ricci for the bag. Let's go. Which brings us back to the middleweight division. We have Chitty Bang Bang, Chidi Njokuani coming in as a -220 favorite. The comeback on Dusko Todorovich is +180. And this is a spot where I like Chitty Bang Bang here, coming off the first round knockout against Marc-Andre Barrios that I don't think many people were expecting, myself included. Look, I bet against Chitty Bang Bang on Contender Series. Prove me wrong there. I didn't bet Marc-Andre Barrios, but I certainly had a decent amount on DraftKings. He proved me wrong there. I'm finally backing him here. I didn't bet him, but I do think he gets his hand raised. I like him on DraftKings. I think he has a little bit of upside. I think there's better fights to target, especially in his price range, but I do think he gets the job done here in what I think is a favorable matchup for him, stylistically speaking. If you told me that Dusko Todorovich was going to come in and try to wrestle here, I do think Todorovich is probably the better grappler. I think he could land takedowns, but this is a guy that averages less than 1 takedown per 15 minutes. He's more of a hold you up, grind you against the cage style, and I just don't like that against Njokuani, who's over the last few years really improved his defensive grappling. And he's nasty in the clinch. He's got nasty knees. He's finished people with his knees in the clinch before. I think Todorovich is a guy who basically relies on his head movement. I think Chitty's the better striker. He's cleaner. I think he could land some big shots here. If Todorovich can't just muscle him against the cage and contain him, I think he's going to get messed up in those spots. So I like Chitty Bang Bang to get it done here. Chitty's the pick, and we can move on. And before we move on, guys, do me a favor. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button as I continue to bring you more UFC content for every single UFC card. I definitely appreciate it. It takes 2 seconds, and it goes a long way in helping me out. And because you helped me out, I'm going to help you guys out and tell you about Thrive Fantasy. Use promo code Jon Kelly DFS at sign up. You will get 100% deposit match up to $100. What that means is you deposit $100, Thrive will give you $100 in your account. You deposit $10, they'll give you $10 in your account. They basically just released a new UFC contest, which is pretty fun. By the way, they have a list of props that you pick, just an over and under, regardless of who it is. And you're going against a bunch of other people in the same contest. So it's not just picking the props, it's peer-to-peer as well. So it has a little bit of game theory to it. I came in 5th last week. I still haven't won it yet. I've played it the last 2 weeks. Came in 5th last week, so we're getting there. But if you want to check it out, guys, it's Thrive Fantasy. And again, promo code Jon Kelly DFS. As you can see, right above my head, we'll get you a 100% deposit match. But moving on to the co-main event, which I'm kind of treating, I think most people are treating this as the main event, even though it's not, just because I think this is a much more exciting fight than the actual main event. We have Michelle Pereira coming in as a -120 favorite. The comeback on Santiago Ponzinibbio is +100. And I like Michelle Pereira here. He's coming in, he's on a 4-fight win streak. He hasn't really been the same, super Showtime poor fight IQ, gonna basically cardio dump after the first round just to put on a show. He hasn't really been fully that guy. Like, look, he's still that guy, but he's starting to fight a little bit smarter. He's mixing in a lot more takedowns here, playing it safe. For not completely safe, like we still see some of the flashy, exciting stuff that we love, but he's also just aware of what he needs to do to win fights at this level. And I like that for him, especially in this matchup against Ponzinibbio, who, let's be honest, has lost a step. Since his return in 2021, he hasn't looked great to me. He's looked like a shell of himself. He's 1-2. He had the win over Miguel Baeza. Turns out that win isn't as impressive as maybe it was at the time, but against Jeff Neal, I know it was a close fight. I really don't like this version of Ponzinibbio. And against a guy who's extremely powerful in Pereira, again, I know he's been fighting more smart. He hasn't been going for the kill as often, but I kind of like Pereira here. I think he has knockout upside. I think he can land multiple takedowns against Ponzinibbio as well. You're getting the younger fighter who's much, much more durable, who I trust more. Probably don't trust his cardio more, but if he's not going to do anything stupid early in this fight, then I think, we could probably say he can fight a hard 15. We've seen him go 15. And yes, he starts to tire a little bit, but not to the point where it's like, a Joseph Holmes that like we talked about earlier. So I think Pereira has upside here. In terms of DraftKings, I'm not going to full fade Ponzinibbio, but it gets pretty dicey with some on the Ponzinibbio side, just durability alone. And I just don't think he has it in him, what we've seen, years ago. I just don't think he's that guy anymore. So we're going to Michel Pereira here. I think he knocks him out, and I think he gets his hand raised on Saturday. Which brings us to our main event. Holly Holm comes in as a minus 250 favorite. Ketlen Vieira on the comeback at plus 200. And man, I couldn't be more excited to tell you Holly Holm is main eventing at nearly 41 years old in the year 2022. But it should be a fun matchup where we're going to see a lot of cage push, holding up against the fence. Ketlen Vieira, I think, is probably more explosive early in the fight, but that's about it. Historically speaking, she fades after the first round. Her cardio hasn't really been there for her across 15 minutes. And yes, it looked a little bit better against Miesha Tate in her last time out, but now she has to go up for 25 minutes against Holly Holm, who, yes, I mentioned the age, but let's be honest, she looks as good as she ever has in her last fight, completely styled on Irene Aldana. I expect a similar performance here. I think we see that typical Holly Holm controller against the fence for basically as long as she wants here, especially as Vieira starts to gas. And if Holly Holm's going to put out the volume that she did in her last fight, I honestly don't even know if this fight is all that competitive. So I think Holm by decision is the official pick, but if Vieira completely gasses out, which is fully within the range of outcomes here, then I think Holm could probably put it on her and get her out of there in the third, fourth, maybe fifth round if it gets that far. But in terms of DraftKings, I do think this is yet another main event. We talked about it last week. You do not have to play the main event this week. I will have plenty of lineups that don't have it. I'll have some that have Holly Holm. I don't know if I'll have much on the Ketlen Vieira side, but this is just a spot where 11 fights, there's probably only 2 or 3 that we really want to target. So you're going to have to find ways to get unique, whether that's fading the main event, whether that's leaving a ton of salary on the table. I mentioned 3 or 4 underdogs that have a real path to victory this week. Maybe you target a 3 favorite, 3 underdog lineup and just leave salary on the table. You just have to think of ways to get unique when it's such a short slate and the field is going to populate on the same group of fighters here. So just something to think about it, guys. As always, you could check out fightnumbers.com where I did a full DraftKings breakdown, written article on my website. I'll have ownership projections for DraftKings up as well later in the week. And of course, I'll have the MMA line movement page and the fantasy points per minute page as well on there. Check it all out. It's completely free. I'm Jon Kelly. Best of luck, and we'll see you guys next time.